Information on the current Zoom controls. Everyone's video will be enabled and the chat box will be open. However, microphones won't be available to use until the panel discussion at the end around noon. At this point, our Zoom administrator, Liz, will give everyone permission to unmute their mics so everyone can engage in our discussion. If you have questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat box and we'll address as many of your questions as we can during the panel discussion. When you are using the chat box, please make sure you use the drop-down box at the top and select everyone so that we can see your message. If there are any questions that we don't have time to address during the panel discussion at the end, we'll be sure to put you in direct contact with the appropriate person to answer it. So on your screen right now, you can see the Zoom participant controls at the bottom of your screen. The unmute and video buttons are in the bottom left-hand side. And also the chat button is at the bottom with the little chat window. And you can also raise your hand during the panel discussion at the end to ask any questions, and we'll be sure to call on you in order. So with that, I'll give you a little bit of background on the Nevada Native Seed Partnership. The NNSP is a partnership of state, federal, and NGO agencies that share the same vision to keep Nevada lands diverse and functioning by using the right seed in the right place at the right time. We are working to accomplish our mission, which is we are a partnership helping Nevada increase the availability of genetically appropriate seed to restore diverse plant communities and sustainable landscapes. On your screen is a list of all the members of the Nevada Native Seed Partnership. These are all the people that have made this forum possible and are working hard to increase the availability of native seed in Nevada. So the goal of today's forum and yesterday's is to connect growers, share information about production, collection, and selling native seed in Nevada. And rather than going through everyone on the Zoom call today to introduce themselves, we would like everyone to please put their name and organization in the chat box so we have an idea of who all is with us today. So with that, my name is Brittany Trimble. I work for the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and I will be your MC today, at least until the discussion at the end. Thank you so much for being here today. And again, if you're returning for day 2, thanks for coming back. So today we'll be focused on market options for selling native seed in Nevada. Following the presentations, there will be a panel discussion at noon that will be moderated where questions can be asked live or via the chat. Although this is in a virtual format, we want to make this forum as interactive as possible. So there will be poll questions throughout the forum today. And if you could please answer those poll questions so we can get an idea of who's with us, that would be great. So to kick things off, we have our first poll question that Liz will put on the screen. And while people answer this question, Mike, do you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen and get your presentation up? And I'll give you about 30 more seconds to answer our first poll question. All right, so it looks like most people with us today were also here yesterday, which is great. Oh, sorry, said that prematurely. So yeah, about 80% of you are returning from yesterday. Great. So our first presenter today is Dr. Mike Taylor, who is an associate professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Nevada, Reno, and a state specialist with the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension. Dr. Taylor's research and outreach activities focus on natural resource issues in Nevada, including wildland fire, urban and agricultural water use, invasive plant management, public land management, and the role of natural resources in regional economic development. Take it away, Mike.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction, Brittany. Yeah, before I get started, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. I'm wearing green. I'm not sure if this shows up on the Zoom call, but yeah, hope you can all enjoy kind of socially distanced beverage after work today. Yeah, so I was brought in to work on kind of native plant materials issues in Nevada by Sarah Kalpa and the Fish and Wildlife Service. They sponsored and they supported a bunch of native plant materials work at UNR. And I was kind of brought in to look at the economics of the issue in Nevada. So I'm going to use my time today to kind of tell you a little bit about what I learned, identify what I think are kind of like the main challenges, and propose some, I think, kind of partial policy solutions to maybe address these challenges. So to get started, and this is just a kind of how I approach the issue, and why I think this issue is something that you know, everybody interested in native plant, in natural resources, and really kind of just in agriculture and in economic development in Nevada and in the kind of Intermountain West should care about plant materials. And so the main reason for me to care, I think that is such a compelling issue, is that you know, as kind of we all know, the combination of invasive plants and wildfire means that a lot of the ecosystems in our region are kind of being degraded over time at a kind of really troubling rate. And one reason this is the case is that a lot of the post-fire rehabilitation treatments, fail to achieve their kind of ecological objectives. So they don't. They're not being successful in rehabilitating the ecosystems to the point where they functioned as they did before the fire. So I guess kind of one of the reasons, and kind of one of the primary reasons that people believe this is this is the case, is that the often the seed being used are not kind of like the locally adapted, genetically appropriate plant materials that are going to give these treatments the best chance of success. Of course, kind of post-fire rehabilitation is very complex, very difficult. There's a number of reasons why these fail, but getting the seed right is kind of important part of this problem. So, you know, if we're thinking about you know, maintaining resource values on these landscapes, maintaining kind of agriculture and recreation and the stuff that supports these local communities, getting the seed right is like a big, is really important. The other thing is that the seed really has to be grown on farms to produce the kind of quantity of seed and at the cost to deal with, you know, post-fire rehabilitation at the landscape scale. You need to have this stuff grown under cultivation on farms. So this is not only a big problem facing the state, but also a problem where the kind of private sector and private growers are kind of indispensable in solving. So, you know, this is kind of from, you know, this is how kind of the starting point for my analysis was this kind of conceptualization of the problem. So the next question was kind of, well, you know, why does the native plant materials industry need support? So like, why is the current commercial market, or why is the perception among land managers in Nevada that the current commercial market is not supplying the range of plant materials that they desire for restoration projects? One of the things I kind of learned in this, you know, as going through the interviews as part of doing this work is, you know, some people in the native plant materials industry were a little bit defensive. They were saying, you know what, we're supplying and even in big fire years, we're supplying the materials that are required and are demanded for restoration. So it's not really, this is not what I kind of learned. It's not really a question of the volume, but having the kind of basically these genetically appropriate materials that are going to have the highest chance for these rehabilitation treatments to be successful. So why does it need support? I guess like the short answer is really risk. A lot of the speakers yesterday talked about the difficulty of growing these plants. So there's kind of tremendous risk there's a lot of risk on the production side, and requires kind of coordination between purchasers and growers, and contracting to kind of mitigate this risk and share this risk. Also, as kind of Matthew Benson pointed out yesterday, the problem is really a demand problem. There's tremendous variability in demand. Native plant materials are characterized by these geographically segmented markets. There's big interannual variability in demand from the fire cycle. Also, a lot of these projects are, kind of one-off rehabilitation projects. So there's not consistent demand for these varieties, so that can give assurances that if the private sector will produce them, that they'll have a market. And I don't think it's true in native plants. It's true in all of agriculture. People aren't gonna plant things if they don't know there's going to be a market and a place to sell it. So I think this is, of all the issues, this variability of demand and market risk, I think is the biggest barrier to having the kind of these plant materials available for the restoration projects in Nevada. Another issue, an issue I'm not going to go in as much today, is there's issues with the fact that the biggest buyers in these markets are the public sector. And public sector procurement has constraints on it that make it so that the public sector purchasers can't, as effectively as they might like, orient the market towards the species they want to grow. These are due to budget constraints, due to, there's kind of an uncertainty about which native plant materials and how they're going to use and how to affect how those plant materials are going to affect restoration outcomes. So there's also this other issue. I'm not going to go into much today. I'll have at the end of the talk kind of you can contact me to get the report, and there's a little more detail in that there. And this is still in the kind of introduction phase. But one of the things that also kind of occurred and I kind of had to kind of wrestle with when getting into this project was, all right, well, we know that because of the need to have a higher success rate in these restoration projects, we know native plant materials are and having more genetically appropriate native plant materials available at low cost is kind of very important need for Nevada. The question is, well then, do these native plant materials need to be grown in Nevada for this to be successful? So how important is having a more robust and active native plant materials industry in Nevada? How important is that to kind of solving this problem? And one of the things I learned is that, the demand for any one of these species in a year is small. These seed increases have to be planned far in advance, so that these relationships between land managers demanding these native plant materials and the growers are really critical in this industry. I think, because like Matthew Benson said yesterday, this is really an industry that works on transaction to transaction. So these long-term relationships are kind of critical. So having more growers and growers in Nevada can only kind of facilitate these long-term relationships between land managers in Nevada and the people growing their seed. And ultimately, that's going to make the seed that's put in the ground, I think, more successful. Another issue is that one of the things that jumped out in the interviews is how much consolidation there's been in the native plant materials industry over the last decade. So another, I think, kind of compelling reason to have kind of more producers in Nevada from the demand side is that consolidation, of course, comes with efficiencies with scale, but also means that it can also lead to, in most industries, to higher prices. This can be so. having more producers and having a more variety of producers to purchase from can only benefit public sector agencies that are the kind of primary purchasers of these plant materials in Nevada. All right, so I'll get to some of the stuff in the report. One of the things I try to do, I try to talk to all the kind of players in the native plant materials industry in Nevada. And the thing that I didn't realize what a big undertaking that would be, and just how many people are and how many players there are in the native plant materials industry, and how many of these players play multiple roles. So, take like the Fish and Wildlife Service. They'll purchase native plant materials to use in, Sheldon Hard and other kind of other places in Nevada. They'll play a role in supplying native plant materials through supports of Seeds of Success and other programs. And they also play kind of a support role in kind of okaying seed mixes and improving seed mixes. So you have all these people, all these players in the industry, and all of them playing a lot of them playing multiple functions, having multiple functions. So one of the things is this is like a pretty kind of complicated industry, and I think that groups like the Nevada Native Seed Partnership that provide coordination and dialogue between these different groups, I think is important given this kind of complexity. And if your group's not on here, please let me know. I tried to be as complete as I could based on kind of the interviews I did, as part of this project. One of the parts of the project was to try to get an idea of what demand looks like for native plant materials in Nevada. This proved to be pretty difficult in that most of the public sector buyers at the time weren't kind of systematically recording all of their native seed purchases in a way that was really easily accessible for researchers. The BLM was the exception. The BLM was able to share data from the Land Treatment Digital Library with me. So I'm going to present some stuff here on the BLM side. Also, NDOW shared some data, but it was only for 2 years. So I'm not going to present the NDOW data here. But so I'm going to present the BLM seed purchases. From everything I've been told, BLM is the biggest purchaser of native plant materials in Nevada, but they're certainly not the only purchaser. So please don't take these slides as a depiction of the total market in Nevada. So again, this is for this 9-year period, and we have it for all of the field offices in the Great Basin. So a total of 230 restoration projects. At the time when I did this analysis, the BLM did not have publicly available price data. So I used price data from the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources that was made available to me by Kevin Gunnell. So thank you, Kevin, if you're on the call. Yeah, so first, this is just the total spending on native plant materials and the total number of projects in this 9-year period. And I think the thing that jumps out at this, first off, is just the incredible variability in spending year to year. You go from kind of big fire years in 2006 and 2007 at almost $3.5 million down to under $400,000 in 2008. So the fact that native plant seed demand in Nevada is so driven by the fire cycle presents this huge issue for industry, because you're going to have these big fluctuations in demand. There's of course ways, through storage and other ways to kind of smooth these fluctuations, but this is kind of like a fundamental driver of the kind of market risk in these markets. The total spending over this period was about $18 million. And again, we used price data from Utah. So these are estimates of total spending. These are not actually out of pocket from the BLM. So we think that the numbers from Utah are going to be pretty representative of what prices were in those years. We're using concurrent prices. But yeah, these are just estimates of these prices. Hopefully, I think reasonable estimates. Here is kind of native seed demand broken down by project type and by field office. I mean, the big thing here, the big story here is native seed demand in this period by the BLM in Nevada was almost all on post-fire rehabilitation projects. So 93% of spending and 200 of 230 projects were post-fire rehabilitation. The other thing is that if you look at kind of these proactive projects, so non-fire projects, there's really only kind of 2 field offices that during this period spent kind of real considerable sums of money on these. This is the Battle Mountain and Ely field office. And that's important because when you think about kind of building the relationships with growers and having the kind of long-term contracts that are going to get a lot of these the species that currently aren't on the commercial market available, these long-term kind of forward contracts with growers, these are more likely to be in these proactive projects. And this is just a very small part of total spending from the BLM in this period. And really only driven by 2 field offices. So this also kind of speaks to the kind of challenge of getting some of these species that aren't currently on the market available. So this is, these are kind of spending broken up by functional group. One thing that I think I was initially surprised by is that, at least in terms of grasses, most of the spending are on grasses that are native to Nevada. So exotic grasses, such as crested wheatgrass, actually was a much smaller part of total spending than I kind of expected going in. So I think that when it comes to grasses, I think the issue is, is this spending on local ecotypes that are locally adapted, but not on whether or not. So the question is not native versus non-native, but whether or not you're choosing the native that's going to have the highest chance of being successful in your restoration project. This is just a species used by the number of projects. There's nothing too surprising here. Most of your kind of workhorse grasses are the ones that are used on the majority of the projects. There's, and one thing, like we mentioned, crested wheatgrass is pretty far down this list, which I expected to be a little bit higher. And that there was, quite a variety of species used on these BLM projects. These are the top 25 species by expenditure. The biggest species by expenditure was sagebrush. Most of the sagebrush, my understanding based on interviews, is wild and collected. And of course, it's really an important component in these restoration projects is that sagebrush, and it's very, very expensive because this stuff is not grown on farms commercially. It has to be, from what I've it's been emphasized to me that this stuff sagebrush is something that wildland collection is going to have a kind of semi-permanent cost advantage over growing this stuff in an agricultural setting. So this kind of speaks to me about how important it is to have good access to streamlining policies for wildland collection. Because even if you're able to transition a lot of these species into being grown agronomically, there's still these critical species for restoration, ones that are getting the most spending in terms of restoration dollars in Nevada that are going to be wildly collected. All right, so that kind of gives you a picture of the BLM seed purchases during that period, and just the tremendous variability in demand. So both tremendous variability in demand and the fact that they're not doing a lot of spending on these kind of proactive projects where you could engage in these kind of long-term forward contracts to mitigate that risk for the growers. So the next thing I kind of did in this project is think about how to conceptualize and how to think about the various types of risks that are associated with these different native plants growing and marketing these different native plant species. So if you look at kind of the economic viability of any species under cultivation, of course, production costs and expected price are going to matter a lot, and demand. And if, of course, your expected price is greater than your production costs, there's a market there. And in those circumstances, the stuff that is going to stand in the way of that being available commercially is going to be risk. There's going to be risk on the production side and then risk on the demand side, this market risk. So came up with this framework to think about production and market risk for different native plant species and what the corresponding policy is going to be. So for market risk, we have kind of low market risk species. These are species that There's going to be a market for every year. They're used in restoration projects. These are kind of widely used kind of workhorse species. We have moderate risk. These are ones that there's going to be big interannual demand, driven by the fire cycle and other factors. And then high risk species, where these are ones where there's, I think we're calling these kind of niche species, where nobody's really growing these species unless they have a buyer already in hand. So they have a contract with a buyer, and these are species that have pretty thin markets generally. For production risk, this is the way it was classified. Low production risk, kind of consistent yields. No production risk, these are species that are difficult to grow, but those difficulties are kind of known going into growing. And then there's these species where potentially they've never been grown commercially before, or only in a handful of times, and the production risk is kind of really unknown. And so the appropriate policy to get these species to market depends on this kind of combination of risk. If something has very unknown production risk, most likely these species are going to be grown in kind of a cost plus type contract where the purchaser takes on that production risk from the producer. So if there's, they pay a fixed fee based, on a markup on the cost to grow it. If a lot of seed is produced, that's wonderful. If a little bit of seed is produced, it's on them to just, that's what they're left holding the bag, as you might say. But anyways, this is just a general way to kind of conceptualize the relationship between these different sources of risk for native plant materials and the appropriate policy to have those brought to market. So one of the things I did is I asked Kevin Gunnell at the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources at the Great Basin Research Center. So thanks again. Second thank you for Kevin. Okay, for the workhorse species that you guys routinely purchase from private growers, how would you classify these in this risk matrix? And I expected for the workhorse species to have most of them be concentrated in this kind of lower left corner, like having pretty low risk and stuff they could just generally buy in the market. And one of the things that kind of Kevin emphasized is that even for these species that they buy routinely, there's enough of a risk in terms of production or in terms of production and marketing that there has to be some additional support given to the growers in order to have these things be kind of reliably available for kind of on the market. So this is just kind of a bunch of these species that they buy normally. In the case of the Great Basin Research Institute, what Kevin relayed to me is that often these are kind of what we determine economics be tacit contracts, so that there's an understanding that when Kevin and his colleagues would give a grower to seed, that they have an interest in purchasing that seed and they'll buy it back, even in the absence of like a formally written contract in a lot of cases. And this just kind of speaks to how important these kind of long-term relationships are between the demand for these native seeds for restoration and these growers. But I thought this was interesting that it's, this is, there is substantial risk even for these species that are kind of, you would be thought of as these workhorse species that are used in a lot of restoration projects. Another kind of nice element of this matrix is it kind of gives us a way to think about the role of research and policy. So research, as we conceptualize in this matrix, is trying to take stuff, agronomic research, trying to take stuff that, okay, well, how can we then take stuff that's now currently only wildland collected, and how can we have work out enough of the agronomy that this stuff can start being grown commercially on farms. So a lot of kind of fundamental research by the plant materials centers and universities, I think, is really trying to move stuff from this far right column into one of these columns here. And as I stated, getting this stuff grown on farms is essential to meeting the challenge of these restoration goals at the landscape scale. It also gives you a way to think about policy. So, a lot of these species that are kind of these niche species that have to be grown with these forward contracts, have to be, are not going to be available for a lot of these wildland restoration, a lot of these post-fire restoration projects where you don't have these kind of, you don't have the ability to really procure seed often through these long-term contracts. So one of the stuff I'm going to talk about in terms of policy is how the public sector side, the demand side for native seeds, can work to take some of these species and move them to a lower risk category through consolidating purchases and other ways to kind of lower the market risk on these species. Because as you lower the market risk on these species, they're more likely to be available commercially when they're needed in big fire years. All right. So we talked about kind of just a big variability in demand from the BLM, thinking about how to conceptualize the various risks faced by these growers and how to design policy to address them. But another, think about policy to kind of reduce the variability in demand. I think it was important to start with to think about what does the commercial market look like and how can this commercial market be supported to reduce that variability in demand. So this is kind of a simple schematic that I came up with based on these interviews of the existing commercial market in Nevada. We have demand on the top, supply on the bottom, and then we have these this is kind of the point of purchase. So that either at the time, these public sector agencies were getting it from the commercial market, from the BLM's consolidated seed buys from the commercial market directly from the consolidated seed buys, through some of these forward contracting methods that the BLM uses. And also the Nevada Division of Forestry was playing a role in supplying a lot of these contracts as well through their relationship with private growers and stuff they were actually producing themselves. So again, the question is then how to reorient this market to reduce the volatility in demand. So came up with a number. There's not, of course, a silver bullet policy, and these are also all kind of partial answers, but there's a number of ways where you can increase the stability in demand. One, and I think the kind of, there's a bunch of these smaller things they can do. Seed menus, which is something that I think Fred Edwards and others are going to talk about later, can also, which are, describing what seed's going to work best in a particular geographic area. That can also do a lot to kind of coordinate demand between different purchasers, both in the federal and state level, and concentrate demand in particular species. So reduce the volatility. So if you have more demand in particular species, you're going to reduce the volatility in demand for those species. Another thing they can do, I think, is this kind of monitoring restoration outcomes and land manager outreach. This is, if there's a lot of compelling evidence, and that evidence is in land managers' hands, that these kind of locally adapted species work better, that will help also concentrate demand for those species and orient the market towards purchasing more of these desired species. Another thing, and this is something to do kind of pretty effectively, somewhat in Nevada, but more like at a much bigger scale in other states such as Utah, is these public sector agencies partner with NGOs in their native seed purchases. So this would be mainly sportsmen's groups putting extra money towards rehabilitation projects so that you have the kind of diverse plant communities that wildlife thrive in. So this could be another important part of stabilizing demand, having more money so that they can go after the species they really think are going to work. Another kind of important aspect is the, and I think in terms of reducing the volatility and demand in Nevada, is there's a lot of purchase of native seeds on the state level. So by NDOT purchase of seeds, NDOW, Division of Forestry. There's also seed purchases by the Bureau of Mining and Reclamation. And other state entities. One of the things that I think is done successfully in other states and could be replicated in Nevada is if you concentrate a lot of these state purchases through a single entity, you give that entity a lot more volume in terms of seed purchases. That allows them to better cultivate these relationships with growers and participate in more of these kind of public-private risk-sharing contracts that these kind of long-term contracts that allow these desired species to be made available. You also just have these kind of economies of scale. You can have expanded warehouse capacity to kind of purchase more seed in non-fire years and have that seed available for the large fire years when they come. So I think that one of the things that I recommend and that could really be beneficial in Nevada is an effort to consolidate public purchases of native seeds in a way that allows a single entity the opportunity then to kind of build this kind of relationship with growers that will make it more likely that the seed is available when it's needed. There's also a lot in Nevada that's currently doing the support producers, and there's more that I think that could be done. So this is kind of last thing in terms of policy for producer support. This is kind of, a lot of it's just enhancing stuff that's already done. There's been some discussion about having a foundation seed bank so that growers have a place where they can go to get seed for their grow outs, and that's, I think, a really kind of can be very beneficial. But there's this other simple stuff: streamlining wildland collection, expanding research at the PMCs and universities so that more of these desired native species can be made commercially available after the kind of agronomy is worked out on the research side. And then, yeah, just doing stuff to not only expand grower outreach, but also, you know, just more transparency about what native seed demand is going to be, so growers have a little more certainty about what the extent of the market is. Yeah, so I think that in total, these are like a number of very small recommendations, not small, but they're recommendations that are, of course, all, you know, all, I think, hopefully moving in the right direction of reducing the volatility in demand, kind of, and concentrating demand in species that are going to be effective at achieving restoration goals, having kind of a thicker demand for those species in a way that will then help orient private growers to feel confident going in and growing those species, to meet this big challenge, this restoration challenge in Nevada. Yeah, so I kind of encourage you, some of these recommendations, quite a few of them, and a lot more are in the Nevada Native Seed Strategy. So I encourage you guys to go and read that. It's going to be available at, the Nevada Native Seed Partnership is in the process now of developing a website. So it'll be available on that website, but it's also, I think we can make that available in the chat at least. And also, so this is the report that I wrote to, you know, this work is based on. I'm very happy to make that available if you send me an email, or I can email it to you. And I hope this can be available on the native Nevada Native Nevada Native Seed Partnership website when that becomes available as well. And a business plan supporting supporting this native seed strategy is kind of in the works and should be available in the coming months. All right, well, look at, thank you for your time. I think I'm on time. And if you have any questions about this presentation or any of these stuff that I mentioned, please feel free to contact me. And I'd like to acknowledge the support of Cooperative Extension. I have kind of a partial appointment at Cooperative Extension, and that appointment allows me to do this kind of outreach work in Nevada, which I'm really grateful for, and also the Fish and Wildlife Service, who supported this work through Sarah Culp and others at the Fish and Wildlife Service. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. I think that was a perfect presentation to kind of set the scene for the rest of the day before we dive into more detail from the different agencies. So thanks again. Thank you to everyone who is typing chats into the chat box. I just want to remind everyone else that you can do this. You can type questions into the chat box during the presentations, and we're keeping track of them to address them during the panel discussion at the end, or between talks if we're a little ahead of time. So if you do this, please just make sure again that you use the drop box at the top of the chat box to select everyone before sending your message. And with that, thanks again, Mike. We do have another poll question for you all. Liz, if you could please post that up on everyone's screen. All right, we'll give you about a minute to answer this poll question. In the meantime, Tricia, do you want to start sharing your screen and getting your presentation ready?
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So I'm just gonna not do the video part. I'm just gonna share my screen, Brittany.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. So Brittany, can you see my screen?
Yes, you are not presenting yet.
Okay.
Just PowerPoint.
All right. So why is that not presenting here? Okay. Now, so Brittany, am I presenting now?
Yep, looks perfect. Before you start, I'm just going to go over the poll results real quick, and then I'll introduce you, and then it's all yours. So it looks like from our poll results that most of us are from federal, state agencies. There are some people from private industry here, as well as some nonprofit organizations and some research. So it's a good spread of people. All right, so our next presentation is from Patricia Roller, who is the National Seed Coordinator for the Bureau of Land Management. In her positions, she coordinates and manages the BLM National Seed Warehouse System. The National Seed Warehouse System oversees seed procurement, storage, mixing, and distribution of seed for BLM projects, field customers, and interagency partners. So take it away, Trish.
All right, everybody. Good morning. Yes, and happy St. Patrick's Day. So I'm going to give you kind of a general overview of our BLM National Seed Warehouse System as it is today. I started in this position in 2015, and so I'll be kind of talking about some of the different changes that have occurred over those 6 years as well, and some potential future plans. So, okay, our vision and our goals for the seed warehouse system is to try to get the right seed in the right place at the right time, which comes right out of our national seed strategy. We want to provide quality seed for BLM and interagency partners for field projects. We also want to always try to find ways to increase storage capacity effectively and efficiently, as well as increase seed buying capacities and use strategic approaches. And in this, communication, building partnerships, and customer service is really important. Okay, so who are the customers for the system? So our intent is to provide seed for all BLM Western states, which includes 40 different BLM field offices. We support programs like the Emergency Stabilization and Rehabilitation Program, Wildland Fuels Reduction Program, Range, Wildlife, Plant Conservation Restoration Program, for forestry. So we try, anybody who's doing vegetation management that needs seed, we try to have that seed available. As well, we do supply seed for a lot of our interagency partners, and I have some of those partners listed below. And NDOW, Nevada Department of Wildlife, is definitely one of those partners, and many others actually. So on an annual basis, we will fill or mix over 250 different seed requests a year. And on an annual basis, we basically procure and supply 2 to 3 million pounds of seed a year, and that's based on the yearly average for since 2015. And just kind of an interesting, BLM definitely was buying seed before 1996, but there wasn't any, recorded data that I could get hold of. But since 1996, we procured over 46 million pounds of seed. So that kind of gives you the kind of scale that we have on the market, basically. Okay, so a lot of change in terms of has happened since really probably starting in 2013. Definitely, as we move forward on making the Ely National Seed Warehouse more functional, if you will. So in 2017, we were able to procure and build a new rack system for the Ely facility that increased our storage capacity by 1.1 million pounds. So that was a pretty exciting pivotal moment in being able to make that Ely facility increase our storage capacity. And then also, finally, we've been working on a mixer for that Ely facility for many, many years. And finally, in 2020, the fall of 2020, that Ely mixer is up and running. So now we have two mixing capabilities, one in Boise and one in Ely. I might note here, and I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of my presentation, but I wanted to kind of put a shout out. One of the other components that's really important for that Ely facility is staffing, and it's a really difficult place to recruit and retain staffing. Right now, I have 2 permanent vacancies in that Ely facility, and I'm hoping to get an announcement out, and just wanted to put a big shout out that in order to really utilize that storage capacity and procure and distribute and mix that seed, we really need to need some help from some of our Nevada partners to recruit and help us fill those positions. So that's pretty important. Basically, right now, we are running that facility with crews rotating down every week from Boise. We have a pretty big workforce in Boise, but that's a lot of travel costs to eat up. We could probably fill 2 or 3 positions with just those travel costs. So anyway, just wanted to get that out there. Okay, essentially, for the majority of seed procurement in the BLM is done by using 2 procurement tools. One is the BLM Consolidated Competitive Seed Buys. Essentially, so we're coming up, our pre-solicitation isn't out quite yet, I don't believe, for the spring buy. We usually hold that in early April. And the purpose of that is maybe to fill some seed requests, a few, we'll have a smaller amount of seed requests in the spring. So the intent of the spring buy is really to stock, increase our stock in both the Ely, Nevada seed warehouse and the Boise, Idaho seed warehouse. Then in the fall, we do the fall consolidated competitive seed buy, which is a 90-day window. And we typically do 3 rounds of seed buying. It used to be that we would only do 1 round, but to increase buying capacity, we extended the buying window out to 90 days, and we do 3 rounds of seed buying in the fall, because that's our real big seeding season, if you will, because it's the post-fire rehabilitation season, and the need in the fall and winter for seed is much greater. So again, the spring buy is to try to increase storage capacity and be ready to roll, and provide those projects seed as best we can early on. And then we'll continue to be buying in the fall with those 3 other rounds to meet the need, basically. Okay, so I think in 2019, well, a calendar year, probably 18, the BLM established the native forb and grass indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, seed increase, or grow out procurement tool. There was an older one prior to that, but there needed to be a lot more work with the market and market outreach. And we did a lot of changes and work to minimize risk for the market in this new IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, seed increase. And the whole purpose was to increase warehouse stock of native forbs and grasses, as well as hopefully increase the market so that that native seed might be offered up on our consolidated competitive seed buys. And so kind of twofold, we're trying to increase our stock in the Ely and Boise warehouse, as well as hopefully minimize risk to the market and increase availability in future years on that consolidated competitive seed buy. I can't talk a whole lot about the native forb and grass IDIQ because it's currently in operation. It's a 5-year procurement tool. And I think, Brittany, we were going to provide some resources to folks in this meeting via the Nevada PTAC. And so I think I'll let Brittany talk about how we're going to provide that information. I can also put the contracting officers' contacts and phone number in a chat, if that would be helpful. So I will put that in the chat after the presentation. And maybe just to kind of give you an example of how our process works. So the field basically fills out and provides us, the system, their project seed request form, which lists all of the different seed types that they are interested in. Over here on the left side, and then the pounds, and then the price. Then if we don't have that available, we'd like to see what their substitutions are, their second choices are. And so we use this form basically so that the field can identify what seed they are interested in, and if they would like that mixed. So that's how the field communicates to the system. And this is our monthly seed inventory and price sheet. This is just an example of it. Like currently right now, we have over 500 different seed types in stock. So this changes every month based on what quantities we have in inventory. I thought I would just show you, this is pretty old data. I haven't had time for the staff right now to take a look at this, from 2017 to 2020. But the trend is probably somewhat the same. 69% native compared to 31% non-native. I'm pretty sure that this trend is the native comparison to the non-native is in and around this same ballpark. if not increasing, especially after 2020. We haven't, yeah. And then I might mention, so in 2016, the fall of 2016, for all sagebrush seed types, we changed how we select all of the different sagebrushes, all of the wildland collected sagebrushes. We changed to the provisional seed transfer zones at the level 3 ecoregions. So we are requesting the vendors and the collectors to provide BLM and our partners wildland collected seed for sagebrush as identified, as source identified by using the provisional seed zones. So we started with the sagebrushes, and then this spring will be the first spring, and we don't have a lot of wildland collected seed that's offered or procured so much on the spring. So we thought this would be a good transition or step for all of our wildland collected seed is now going to be identified, offered, and selected based on provisional seed transfer zones under the level 3 ecoregion. Although we will be kind of grandfathering in, basically, if vendors have seed that they want to offer up the old way, which is by county, state, elevation, and precip range, we need to allow them to also do that. We don't want to just cut that off. So it's going to be a transition. There might be some growing pains, but ecologically, we think it's the best path forward. And I hope I didn't confuse everybody on that. It's kind of a little hard to communicate, but okay. So this is the best way to reach us, is this BLM_seed_all@blm.gov. And as I understand it, questions and input are going to be put into the chat. And then I will also be available later in the day for the panel. I will end slideshow.
Great. Thank you so much, Tricia. And as Tricia mentioned, we do have some information for the Nevada PTAC. Liz, if you could please put that up on the screen. So the Nevada PTAC is part of the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development. It stands for the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. This link here on the handout, I just put in the chat for everyone to go to. So the Nevada PTAC, it provides procurement technical assistance to establish Nevada for-profit businesses, especially small businesses, in their pursuit of local, state, and federal government contracting, subcontracting, and other opportunities inside and out of Nevada. And just a note, an established Nevada business is one that has a primary and physical address or location in Nevada. The phone numbers for the individual PTAC offices are listed below, as well as the contact email. And I encourage everyone who's interested in learning more about state and federal procurement to reach out to these PTAC offices for assistance. All right, so we are a little bit ahead of schedule, and there are a couple questions in the chat already. So we're gonna answer some of those. Mike Taylor, are you still on? It looks like these questions are for you so far. And if anyone has any questions for Tricia, please type them into the chat box.
Yeah, I'm here.
All
Hi.
right. So we have a question from Michael Barnett. He says, I don't understand why consolidation is recommended on the demand side, but not on the supply side. My understanding from the presentations yesterday is that the producers are extremely fragile economically, so fragmenting that side of the equation could be detrimental to them. Do you have anything to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I didn't just emphasizing on the demand side was just, you know, because of the focus on kind of reducing volatility in demand. Like one of the things that, I mean, it's in the that kind of like that risk matrix, but like, and I think it's something that Ed Kleiner also brought up in the chat. But given the kind of both the risk both in growing on the production side and in marketing these species, one way to deal with this risk is through diversification at the enterprise level. So growing a lot of different species. Sometimes you can more, with the idea that you'll make enough money on some of them to kind of compensate for the money you lose on others. And I think probably one of the drivers of the consolidation and the reason to have scale in this industry is because absent significant or sufficient private public risk sharing, it's onto the enterprises themselves to reduce risk through scale and diversification. So it's not that that's not important, and I think that is kind of these same factors are driving consolidation on the industry side. So it's not that that's not important. I think that's not something that necessarily you need like the public sector to encourage. It seems to be the economics of the industry seem to be having those trends happen on their own. So yeah, so that's my take on that. It's a very good question.
All right, thanks, Mike. I haven't seen anything else from Michael in the chat yet, so sounds like you probably covered it. There is a comment from Ed in the chat. Diversification is also important at the farm due to climate variability or infestations that can impact some plants and not others, not keeping all your eggs in one basket. Good point. All right. Tricia, it looks like we have a question for you if you're still around and can answer.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, so the question is from Russell Wilhelm. He says, can you clarify what seed traits need to be included on SI tags per BLM specifications if provisional seed zone data is not available?
Provisional seed zone is not available. Maybe I need a little bit more information. Why would it not be available?
Hey Tricia, so yeah, just in your presentation, you had indicated that there are specific traits that need to be included on SI tags outside of provisional or empirical seed zone data. I think you said annual average precipitation and then some other traits that I didn't quite get. So I was just curious if you could clarify that.
Okay, so historically, all source identified wildland collected or grown out seed previously was identified, the source information that would be provided on our bid sheet for us to evaluate was previously county, state, elevation range, and precip range. That was previously. And so in the fall of 2016, for all sagebrushes, we thought we would start there. We are now requesting for sagebrush, the level 3 ecoregion and C transfer zone source identified information, if that makes sense. And then this spring, for all source identified wildland collected or grown out seed, we're going to ask for the ecoregion and C transfer zones for all source identified seed. Does that help, Russ?
That does. That's perfect.
All right. Thanks for answering that, Tricia. And I just want to make note to Ed that we are planning to bring up your subsidizing R&D comment question during the panel discussion at the end. We think that's a good discussion topic. So thank you for that. So Mike, another question for you. Do you foresee demand increasing in this market for the foreseeable future?
I mean, it's probably a better question for Patricia than it is for me. You know, you know, there's, and then some of the producers from who spoke yesterday can also speak to this. You know, it seems, at least from my understanding, that the needs for native plant materials and rehabilitation projects are going to be increasing going forward. You know, the combination of just all the stuff that's driving this kind of increase in the fire cycle, and these other factors that are leading to ecological degradation. So, at the fundamental level, in terms of the demand for these products, like, you know, these it doesn't seem like, seems like that's going to be increasing. Whether that translates into seed purchases depends on policy from the federal agencies and the state agencies who are kind of the primary purchasers of these species for wildland restoration projects. So, I mean, I kind of asked Patricia about you know, how she sees kind of BLM policy related to these species changing going forward. Because I think that's the big unknown. Not that there's going to be, I think that in terms of needing to have species on the landscape to meet ecological objectives, I think that's, I mean, going to continue and to grow over time. So I kind of pass the buck to to Patricia.
So Brittany, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Do you foresee demand increasing in this market for the foreseeable future?
Oops. Okay. Okay, I'm unmuted now. I do, especially with the native forb and grass IDIQ, or indefinite quantity indefinite delivery procurement tool. So you know, it has been increasing the last 6 years, and I think the BLM is trying to enhance procurement capacity and tools to do just that. And I see the, you know, we have not had time or the staff to actually quantify it, but based on my qualitative experience, just in the last 5 years, the demand from the field is increasing in that direction.
And I can chime in too from the state perspective. There's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that's currently a bill in Congress. It has passed the House already, but it's waiting for decision in Congress right now. And if that passes, state and tribal agencies will be receiving a lot more money each year for helping implement their wildlife action plans, which would entail fire rehab and habitat restoration It's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. RAWA is what people referred to it as. But it could increase NDOW's state budget by millions of dollars each year, which would help us procure more native seed for habitat restoration and rehabilitation projects. So call your congressman. Trisha, it looks like we have another question for you from Steve. Trisha, are the BLM seed inventory and price sheet monthly updates available to the public? If so, where can they be obtained?
So I'll have to kind of touch base with our contracting officer on that question, because it's not been asked before. And we can only procure and mix or distribute to either federal, state, or city agencies. We can't sell to the public. And when I mean sell, I mean procure and then distribute. But we can't purchase seed for the general public. And that list is not what we actually procured. That's not the price that we procured. That, it's like an average moving price that the field then gets. So it's not a price that we paid for that particular fall buy. It's an actual average price per year. So I hope I didn't confuse anybody. So Brittany, is there a way that I can provide information in the future for that kind of question? If I have to touch base with someone?
Sure. If you want to send myself or Russell or Liz, whoever, just good email addresses, you mentioned you might provide some for your contracting officers for people to reach out to. We plan to send out an email at the end of the forum to give attendees good information for future contact. So that would be great.
Okay.
All right, Mike. It looks like we have a question for you from Liz.
Okay.
Federal government has a long history of stabilizing markets for producers, for example, milk, corn, etc. Could this approach be used for native seeds?
Well, yeah, a couple things. Yeah, I mean, the federal government and the USDA has a much bigger role in these kind of big commodity crops than they do in kind of fruits or vegetables or any kind of these even more specialty crops than that. There's far fewer federal programs. So yeah, I think that but yeah, I think in general, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me when I first started looking into this industry is you had a lot of people, like people at the BLM, for example, trying to kind of engineer from what their seed needs were some kind of agricultural policy to work with producers, like these IDIQ contracts, et cetera, rather than having people at the USDA who do this stuff for like kind of their kind of core competency in their job to work to support the industry. So I mean, there's kind of like a number of farm bill programs that I think could be expanded to cover native plant materials. These could be loan assistance programs, disaster assistance, non-insured disaster assistance programs, other programs. I haven't looked into this issue in detail. I mean, I'm not an ag policy expert. But I think this should be kind of a national priority. I think it is a national priority in some circles, but providing that kind of stabilization payments to producers would be I think given the challenges like the producers outlined yesterday, and the kind of huge variability in demand for these species, this is something that I hope going forward gets explored. And I think Sarah Culpa mentioned that somebody at the last National Native Seed Conference is looking into this in ways to stabilize the market through some of these federal programs. And I mean, I don't have a great answer for it, but I think it's something that has potential.
Great, thank you. And just so everyone knows, Ray Hopper included the link for more information on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, if you're interested in that. There is a question here from Steve, and maybe myself and Tricia can answer. He says that all presenters have presented older native plant materials buy and sell data and indicated that these data are scarce. To encourage private growers, shouldn't these data be kept current? I can go ahead and say from NDOW's perspective that that is a large part of my position personally, and we've been keeping track of more data since 2018. So we recognize that that was a problem and we are trying to address it and be better about it. Tricia, do you have anything to say to that?
Yes. So yeah, we had we haven't quantified 2017 to 20 yet, but we will be working on it. Given that we're real short staffed right now, we're just haven't been able to get there yet. But we also need that data to go into our seed buying process, into our consolidated competitive seed buying processes, so that we like industry need to understand what we need to procure in advance so that it's available. So we'll be looking at the trends shortly before the spring buy, but I just didn't have that data readily available today.
Great, thank you. Well, it looks like we're pretty much caught up with our schedule, so we will move on now to our next presentation. Corrine, would you like to start sharing your screen and starting your presentation? I'll introduce you here.
Yes, thanks. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm gonna navigate over to my PowerPoint.
Perfect. So Corrine Francis Clark is the state forester for California and Nevada BLM. She became the forestry program lead for Nevada BLM in 2012, and then combined this position with the California BLM state forester position in 2017. All commercial and personal use permits for seed collections are issued by the forestry program leads in each BLM office that manages the lands from which collections occur.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having me at this forum. It's been very interesting, great speakers. So I'll just dive right in. So I like to think of a lot of natural resources in this capacity in terms of we like to bring together people from radically different fields and wait for the friction to produce heat, light, and magic. Sometimes it takes a while. So,
Yep, pause just for a second, Corrine. It looks like we're not seeing your slideshow just yet.
Okay. Well, I don't know why. It's on my screen.
So if you hit share screen.
Okay.
And make sure you've selected it. We did have a little bit of a trouble with this.
I'm going to stop the video because that lets me close my laptop and look at my main screen.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
There we are.
Now we got it.
Yay.
You can just go into slideshow view. Perfect. It looks great now.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought the laughter was because of the cartoon, but it's because I was technically challenged.
No problem.
So this is one of my favorite cartoons to describe natural resource work. We like to bring together people from radically different fields and wait for the friction to produce heat, light, and magic. Sometimes it takes a while. So the fact that I'm a forester working on native seed is kind of a unique thing, and I love it. All of our forestry folks in Nevada are very supportive of the seed program. A lot of them have collateral duties with emergency stabilization and rehab, fuels work, and weeds work. So it's a good fit for us in Nevada to be working on seed increases, and so very supportive. So I just want to talk about the types of collection permits that we issue through the forestry program, kind of the policy on these permits, the pricing, how we price the seed. I'm going to go over some of the typical permit forms just for your knowledge, and who to contact for seed collection. Also, what kind of time frame to expect, and I definitely want lots of questions and discussion at the end. So in terms of types of permits, we handle commercial, which allows for the collectors to resell the materials. We have personal use, no resale, trading, or bartering allowed in those. And then there's free use when it's in the best interest of the public. So a lot of our research collections are in that free use category. It's definitely usually limited to low value. I think the cap is about $100 for nonprofits for free use permits. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what kind of volumes we handle across the 2 states. We can do like up to 300,000 pounds a year under these permits. It's definitely, the values are 120,000 over 3 years collected into the program, and that goes back to the Treasury. One of the things that, it definitely, the value doesn't pay for necessarily the amount of time we spend, but we get the value in terms of the seed getting on the land. So in terms of policy and guidance, this falls under the 5400 regulations. Basically, any kind of veg permit falls under that. And then in 2013, there was a effort to kind of, make a consistent approach to native seed collection permits. And so that's the IM we work under. And I'm going to go into some details on how that policy plays into our permit program. So under this IM, we want to require competition as much as possible to make it fair and equitable, and not just go to the same collector all the time. And so we always look for opportunities to do, say, competitive bidding, or find ways to equitably issue these permits. We only deal with 10-pound increments. The permit must be in possession of everybody on site when you're collecting. We encourage GPS locations and as much source identification information as possible. The IM requires bonding on all sales of $2,500 or more, and it's a 20% bond at that level. In Nevada, we often bond even lower than that, just because we're trying to get collectors in compliance with all stipulations. And, collecting a bond allows us to kind of enforce those stipulations. So if there's any trash or damage to roads, we can use that bond to repair the site. And we've never had major issues with collectors. They're kind of used to these bonds. And so that's kind of how we use the bonding. We always include stipulations to each permit. We also use a minimum price. So for the most part, we're at the minimum price on all of our permits, unless we do a competitive bidding, which then sets the price higher based on you know, the market and the competition. And so we set the minimum price at 10% of market value. And that's set through looking at the market value based on the seed warehouse buys. And I'm going to go through the pricing list shortly. If it's not listed in the pricing list, we just apply the minimum price of 10 cents per pound. We also have a road maintenance fee that any permit that's issued, whether it's for firewood, Christmas trees, anything, adds another 20%. And then that funding goes into a road maintenance fund so that we can repair damaged roads. So this is the pricing table. We set our minimum prices off for native seed collection permits. We work closely with the seed warehouse, and they update these prices every year in the spring. And it is 10% of the clean delivered seed cost. And that's the price list. So one of the things we did to provide better consistency across BLM Nevada districts is I asked that all the programs put native seed permits under the 5450-1 contract. This is the one contract we have that has bonding within it. And so that allows us to go back over the years and look at the various seed permits without them getting all jumbled up into, say, firewood or Christmas tree permits. So that's the point of this slide, is it's a certain form we're using in Nevada. And then this is just kind of the look of how we, you know, we issue it by pounds. We have a price per pound, and then we have the road maintenance fee that goes into the fund. And that's just an example of the electronic version of this form. And this is what the form will look like when you get a permit. Pretty straightforward. Just taking a drink of water. And so for context, if you are looking for a permit, I included this. Obviously, we have turnover sometimes, and these names may change. But, you know, if you can't get a hold of somebody, just call each district and ask for, you know, the forestry lead at the time. So I know our Battle Mountain forestry lead has got a new job. So Anna O'Brien's moving out of our programs shortly, which is going to be a big void. Many of you might have worked with her. So last year we convened as a group, and we looked over our sagebrush seed sales and kind of developed some new competitive procedures where collectors had to, you know, submit for a permit all at the same time. And then we looked at the overlap, and we made those go competitive. And so definitely looking for feedback on that process. We're refining it as we go forward, but it was just a new thing last year. And then just in terms of timeframes, it's always best practice to submit information about what kind of permit you want 30 days prior to needing to collect. But we are going to issue some policy shortly that says that 10 business days is required for the full and complete information for us to process it timely. Just a note, if collection spans multiple BLM districts, each collector needs to go to all the districts, not just one. So be aware of that. And that's it for my little talk right now. I'm interested in questions and discussion, and had to include a little forestry cartoon, of course.
Great, thank you so much, Corinne. Just a reminder, please type any questions for Corinne in the chat box. She won't be available during our panel discussion later, so we'll be fielding her questions right now until about 10:55. So Corinne, there is one comment in the chat that I'll read for you from Ed Kleiner. He says, we've always had a problem with original permit must be in possession, as we might have 2 trucks in the field at 2 different sites, both on the same permit. who gets the copy, and we keep one at the office as well and one with field management. Do you have any recommendations for solving that problem?
Yeah, I don't know that the language is the original permit. I'll have to look in our, we just say the permit must be in possession. So I think copies will suffice. So maybe it's a stipulation language that we need to fix, Ed.
All right, thank you. I have another question here from Bobby Jones. He says, "Hi, Corrine. I want to help put together large-scale volunteer efforts for seed collections in different parts of the state across several districts. What direction should I be looking in terms of type of permit, or am I dreaming too big?"
Yeah, I mean, I think that would fall under almost like a free use permit, especially with volunteers. And we can go fairly large with justification, but there's a lot of coordination that's needed across the districts. One of the things to be aware of when we have seed collectors out on the landscape, we have other folks like grazing permittees who want to know when people are on their allotments. And so it's just a real big coordination need to know species, when, where, who. And so, you know, the best practice is get as much information dialed in early in the process so that we can have that good communication going forward. You can approach me if it's a big statewide, and then I'll pull in the forestry leads that are needed for that and just kind of consolidate it that way. So I just saw the next question about Anna leaving. We don't have a name of who's going to be acting in her place just yet.
All right. Another question from Liz. Does BLM source identify seed, or do I need to coordinate with someone else?
Not sure if that's a question for me to answer. We encourage source identified seed. We ask the questions about where the seed comes from, but I think that that's mostly tracked through the warehouse system.
And if I might jump in, I think Russ might answer this probably more correctly, but source identification is done through the department on collections that may happen on any resource land. So whether that's BLM or whoever else they have requested identification and collection from, if that helps answer that question too.
Yeah, Megan, that's right. So depending upon which state you exist in, you'll want to contact your local seed certification agency. So for Utah, that would be Utah Crop Improvement Association. For California, that would be California Crop Improvement Association, and so on, right? So for Nevada, it's the Nevada Department of Agriculture.
Great. And I see that Jess Kindred has her hand up. Jess, I don't believe you can use your mic right now. Is there any way you can type your question into the chat? In the meantime, Liz says you can use your mic now, Jess.
So I had a follow-up from the Battle Mountain Anna question. Just I see a lot of questions around permit holders also, and Kareem touched on needing to coordinate with permit holders. So who would be the best person to reach out to about that with Anna gone?
Well, so it wasn't that the collectors have to coordinate with permittees. It's that the BLM specialist should know when the collections are so that they can kind of funnel that information to our grazing permit holders.
All right, thank you. It looks like there's a question from Steve here. He says, so seed collection by an individual for eventual grow out on my property requires a permit, but it's free. Do I understand that correctly?
So for that example, Steve, if you're growing it out to eventually sell it, it would be considered a commercial activity. Now, if you're growing it out for your own personal use on your own land, it would be a personal use permit. So, the free use is really for small scale research specific, permits. And so that's kind of how we look at the different types of permits and what the uses are.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that point, actually? Just hopping in. Steve, and maybe Steve, you can unmute and actually state your question, because I'm not clear from your question. Are you trying to collect on your private land or trying to collect on public land? That was unclear from your question to me.
Steve says public land in the chat.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Another question from Susan Abel. Are grazing permittees really engaged in seed collection efforts? Do you think there is an opportunity to work with some to arrange for collection on private land?
Yeah, I can't really answer that. That would probably be, various grazing permittees have different interests, and the main thing that I've just been told is that they do want to know when seed collections is happening on their allotments. So I'm not really dialed into what they're doing for seed collection.
Sorry, Brittany, can I jump in? I think, Susan, that's a great point, and maybe places where other agencies can engage in that in communication of opportunity, if that occurs, how to set that up, and what agencies or groups might be interested in doing some of that sort of stuff. I don't know how many species are shared on private land that they may be collecting on public adjacent to, but I think it's an interesting opportunity for sure.
And I'll add in, we do have state land. NDOW owns wildlife management areas. And if you're interested in collecting seed on those areas, please reach out to me and I'll disperse to the correct person.
Can you say that again, Brittany, and lean in a little bit? You were pretty muffled.
Yep. So we do have state owned land. NDOW owns wildlife management areas across the state. If anyone is interested in collecting seed on those lands, please reach out to me and I can disperse the request to the appropriate person within the agency. So does anyone else have any more questions for Corrine while we have her here?
Definitely appreciate the dialogue, and best of luck to everybody in doing wildland collections. I will say something that I forgot to mention. So being a forester, we have tree seed that we store a lot in nurseries, and woody species tend to store better. But one of the research needs is probably seeing how these seeds do in refrigeration and freezer storage and how long they can be viable to be stored. I know Lucky Peak has started storing sagebrush seed in their freezer space, and they reported to me that there's been some success in keeping that stored for longer. So in these, wet years where there's ample seed that we can wildland collect, if we can figure out some seed storage to get us through the lean years, wildland collections might be a viable way of getting seed increase as well as just grow out. Forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
So,
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions for Corrine, we might just kind of head into our break a little bit early here. Liz, thank you, Corrine, first of all, for your presentation. I think that was great information for people not as familiar with seed collection. So thanks for being here.
great. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you. So there are a couple comments in the chat. Elizabeth Ledger from UNR says that they would be all over testing seed storage and longevity for wild collected seed. And Nets from the Forest Service says that the Forest Service has a long history of woody species seed storage, and you may want to ask about or if you're interested, you may want to ask about the Forest Service woody seed manuals. So with that, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. So we do have another poll question for you all. Liz, if you wouldn't mind putting that up on the screen. We'll keep this poll question up until the end of the break. If everyone could return at 11 o'clock Pacific time, that would be great. That's about 15 minutes. All right, thanks everyone. See you in a few. All right, it is 11 o'clock, so we'll get started again. Up on your screen are the results of the poll that we had during the break, and it looks like a little over half of people in attendance today are interested in the native seed market, which is awesome. That's why we're having this. So thank you so much for joining us. All right. So again, welcome back, everyone. We are going to dive into the presentations about state seed needs and purchasing now. I will start it off with my own presentation about Endow seed needs. So let me start sharing my screen here. All right, can someone let me know if they see the right screen up?
Looks good, Brittany.
Perfect. All right, so again, my name is Brittany. I am the seed and soil biologist in the Habitat Division at the Nevada Department of Wildlife. I'm based out of Elko, but I work with seed needs across the whole state. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what types of projects Endow buys seed for, the factors that determine what kinds of seed and how much seed we purchase, and some of the numbers showing some of our seed purchasing in the last few years. So to start, what do we buy seed for? Wildfire rehab probably encompasses most of our seed purchasing. We work hand in hand with land management agencies and other landowners to replace or increase forage or cover that wildlife relies on within burned areas. A lot of times this includes cost sharing, where we purchase seed more valuable to wildlife, for example, and the BLM can purchase seed that may be more valuable for site stabilization. That way we're able to produce a robust seed mix to put out on the landscape. Sometimes we're able to purchase seed that is not immediately needed for fire rehab, but rather to store in our reserves to have it available earlier in following years for future rehab or restoration projects. We have standardized seed mixes for different ecotypes and habitat types that we base these purchases on, and these do include substitute species if the species in our seed mixes are not available. Sometimes purchasing seed ahead of the actual need allows for better application timing, especially for drill seeding, so we aren't restricted by when seed becomes available to start our project. We also purchase seed for habitat restoration projects in degraded habitats. For example, these include pinyon and juniper removal projects, where pinyon and juniper may be encroaching in sagebrush habitat, or revegetating cheatgrass monocultures, for example. We often work with the BLM to plan and cost share fuel breaks and green strips to prevent wildfire spread to areas that are important for wildlife, or also to protect areas where we have past investments that are known to burn repeatedly. And finally, we purchase seed to restore or enhance upland and wetland habitats and create food plots for various wildlife species on our wildlife management areas. So as you're all aware, and as Mike was talking about earlier, some years are worse than others when it comes to fire. In years like 2018, when we burned over 1 million acres statewide, most, if not all of our seed purchasing was reactive as opposed to proactive. Whereas in smaller fire years, we're able to plan ahead more and purchase more seed for future rehab and restoration projects, allowing us to take a more proactive approach. And so while year-by-year situations sometimes determine what seed we can purchase, on average, about 85% of our seed purchases are used for fire rehab or reactive management, and about 15% are used for the more proactive management types. And so obviously, As a Department of Wildlife, our main objective when it comes to wildfire rehab and habitat restoration is to make the area functional for wildlife. Ideally, we would like to do this using locally adapted native species, but there is a large deficit of Nevada adapted species available, which often forces us to prioritize species that are more resilient to drought or disturbance than the available cultivars of native species. However, there are multiple factors that go into deciding what exactly we put on the ground. So what goes into how we decide what seed to buy? First of all, we consider the site characteristics. Are there specific habitat designations within a site? For example, is it sage-grouse brood rearing habitat where they might be relying on insects and therefore we might need to establish a more forb heavy component? Or is it crucial winter range for mule deer, where we know that thousands of mule deer will be showing up in the winter relying on forage that can stand above the snow line? What is the ecological site potential? What plants can germinate and persist under the site's climate and soil conditions? What's the probability of success for the seeding based on potential disturbances? For example, is the site susceptible to repeated fires, or maybe it experiences heavy grazing pressure from wildlife, livestock, or horses? How accessible is the site, and does the topography restrict which application method we can use? Is drill seeding suitable for a site, or will we need to rely more on fixed wing or helicopter application? Who are the stakeholders for a project site? Which land management agencies need to be involved in the planning? Obviously, a majority of the land in Nevada is managed by federal agencies, so we're mostly working with them on these projects. Who are the private landowners that might be affected by the project? And do members of the public have a staked interest in the project area? Finally, but definitely not least, what are the financial limitations? How big is the project area? This might limit what species we're able to include in our seed mix or our application rate. If it's a huge area, we might have to kind of skimp on those things a little bit. Which species are available to purchase and how much do they cost? Which application method do we need to use? As I mentioned before, for the site characteristics, knowing whether you need to drill seed or seed with fixed wing or helicopter is very important. Helicopter seeding is much more expensive than drill seeding, so you may need to account for that in your project. Overall, the amount of funding available and these other factors will determine what kind of seed we purchase and subsequently the application rate and the extent of an area we're able to seed. So now I have a couple figures to show you what types of seed we've purchased over the last few years. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus on grasses and forbs, since those are the plant types that most of you might be interested in producing, as opposed to shrubs. So here on the left, the top chart shows the breakdown between the quantity of native versus non-native grasses that we've purchased since 2018. 76% of the grasses we purchased were native and 24% were non-native. The chart on the bottom shows the breakdown of the cost of native versus non-native grasses. And as you can see, with native grasses encompassing 78% of the spending, it's pretty comparable to the quantity, with natives comprising slightly more costs than non-natives. For forbs, on the other hand, here on the right-hand side, you can see that the chart for pounds is almost inversed, showing that we tend to purchase more non-native forbs than natives. And this is because of the much higher cost of native forb species than non-natives, which the growers yesterday touched on the complications growing some native forbs and why they are so expensive. So this is reflected in the different percentages in the bottom graph here. You can see that even though only 38% of the forbs that we purchased were native, that comprised almost 70% of the amount of money that we spent on forbs. And so these discrepancies are especially obvious when you look at the average cost of the natives versus non-natives here in the boxes. The top box shows the average cost of native versus non-native grasses. And as I mentioned, they're pretty comparable, with natives being slightly more per pound than non-natives. But the forbs, there's a huge discrepancy between native and non-native average cost, with natives costing almost $24 a pound and non-natives costing about $7 a pound. So all this being said, we do tend to purchase more of the less expensive native species of grasses and forbs so that we can purchase more of them to have a greater impact on the ground. But this isn't to say that the more expensive native species don't have high value for wildlife habitat. If those species were more available and economical, we would definitely purchase more of them. Here's another chart showing our average annual expenditures on native and non-native grasses and forbs. You can see between 2018 and 2020, on average, we spent over $400,000 a year on native grasses and over $90,000 a year on native forbs. And so obviously this is average. As Mike showed in his chart, the years are pretty variable depending on the fires and just our general funding capacity in general. So it does vary, but these are the average values. But something else worth mentioning is that essentially all of the native species that are available for us to purchase in large enough quantities to make it worth our while are cultivars. And these cultivars are sourced from locations and grown out in locations that have much higher precipitation levels than areas where we need to put them on the ground in Nevada. This often results, even though we do purchase the seed and these species are considered to be native in Nevada, their adaptation to the higher precipitation levels often result in poorly adapted seed that can result in poor establishment success. This, along with the cost restraints I just illustrated, force us to prioritize species that are known to be more drought and disturbance tolerant, especially when the ultimate priority is just getting cover and forage established for wildlife. So here is a list of some of the Great Basin grasses with high wildlife value that we use in our mixes. I included the minimum precipitation levels required by each species on the right-hand side. So I'll save you the boredom of listening to me read through this list. But I did underline the species that we do include in our standardized seed mixes that I mentioned before. And these species tend to be the ones that we purchase more often. These include squirreltail, Indian rice grass, blue bunch wheatgrass, Great Basin wild rye, Sandberg's bluegrass, Snake River, thick spike, and western wheatgrasses. The species that are adapted to the lower precipitation levels would be more widely applicable for habitat restoration. As many of you know, there are some very harsh sites in Nevada where we might only get 4 inches of rain a year or even less. In the Great Basin, the minimum is probably closer to 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches on bad years. But with that being said, I did underline the species that have the greatest wildlife value and would probably be the highest priority for our agency to have locally adapted seed for. These include Indian rice grass, needle and thread grass, blue bunch, Snake River, and thick spike wheatgrasses. And this is a list of native Great Basin forbs that have high wildlife value, and subsequently those that we would prioritize for purchasing. These species that I underlined in green are those that we currently purchase most often and include in a lot of our seeding projects. These include Western Yarrow, Lewis flax, Palmer's penstemon, Rocky Mountain bee plant, and annual sunflower. And you can notice that most of these species that are available are those for the higher precip zones across the state. Western Yarrow has the lowest precip zone at 8 inches. While we do still try to include a forb component in our seed mixes for the lower precip zones in the state, there really isn't a whole lot available. at least that's economical. So these species that I underlined in yellow are the species that have really high wildlife value and would be usable in multiple habitat types across the state. But they are not currently widely available, or they are too expensive to purchase on a large enough scale for our projects. These include desert gooseberry leaf and scarlet globe mallows and sulfur flower buckwheat. Oops. And so finally, how do we purchase our seed? We have a few different ways that we purchase seed. First one being the BLM consolidated seed buys that we've already heard about. We can also purchase seed through the Nevada Division of Forestry and also directly from producers who are vendors with the state. So that's all I have for you today. Again, this is my contact information if you'd like to reach out to me. And so now I will pass the reins over to Bradley Tate. Bradley, would you like to start sharing your screen and getting your presentation ready while I introduce you?
Sure, let me pull it up here.
All right, so Brad is a management analyst with the Nevada Department of Wildlife, where he serves as the certified contract manager for the agency. He has experience not only on the state contracting side of things, but also with state purchasing regulations and guidance. Go ahead.
Perfect. Does everything look good?
Yep, it's great.
Awesome. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Brittany asked me to give a quick overview of the vendor registration process for the state, especially for those who may have never gone through it before or need to update their info. By completing these registrations, you'll be able to provide good payment without delay. Provide registrations at some point along the line. It's just better to get this completed sooner so that we can be prepared to make payments and make sure everyone's happy. It's my understanding that the two links that I'm going to give in this presentation will be provided at the end of the forum here. If not, I did drop those in the chat, and you can always reach out to me as well if anyone else needs them. So jumping right into it, there's two important vendor registrations with the state. The first one's going to be called Nevada ePro. This is a newer system that was developed by state purchasing, and it's what they consider their main form of vendor contact. So not only will bid solicitations, when we go out and request quotes for seeds, will be processed through Nevada ePro. If you're a vendor that can provide services, different RFPs will be posted there. Just general information from the state purchasing division will all be accessible through Nevada ePro. So that's important just for the information side of things. And then second is the DAWN registration. This is our state's financial database. And this is where all of your remittance info, bank information, and other financial backup are kept when they assign you a vendor number. And this is arguably the most important part because you will not be able to get paid unless that's completed. As soon as we get the DAWN information set up, that's, like I said, the most important part, and we'll be able to process any invoices related to seed buys as soon as that's completed. So for Nevada ePro registration, you're going to visit the nevadaepro.com website. Once again, that link was provided in the chat and hopefully will be distributed as well at the end. It's very simple to sign up. There's a register button in the top right with a big old red arrow pointing at it. And once completed, you'll be able to receive any pertinent information from state purchasing related to any goods and services you can or will provide. That one's a pretty self-explanatory registration process. It's just follow the instructions, submit any information that they request, and you'll be good to go. And then lastly, we have the DAWN vendor registration. That is usually completed through the controller's office. There's the link above there. It just like Nevada ePro, you'll have to follow the subsequent instructions. They're going to ask for all kinds of different banking info, company info. If you're registered with the state, very similar questions like that. If this is not completed before quotes are submitted, if our program staff goes out and requests quotes for certain seeds, there could be a delay in processing payments once a vendor is selected. The most important part of the DAWN registration is to make sure you include either a blank voided check or a bank account information with routing number on company letterhead. That's the single thing that we see is missed the most. It causes significant delay because the controller's office sometimes does not notify us if you are missing information. And we would be sitting on an invoice for many weeks until we finally figure out exactly what happened. So as long as you include the bank account info and then all other information as necessary, you'll be good to go and you'll have a vendor number established and we can make those payments. So once completed, you'll have access to any important information distributed by state purchasing through ePro. And like I said, that's not just for bid solicitations related to seed buys. If you're a vendor that can provide services for a contractual basis, that's also where those RFPs will be posted and you'll be notified through there. So it's a really important system to be a part of just as far as information is concerned. And then lastly, once you're set up with Dawn, that's just the financial side. Once you're set up in Dawn, you'll be able to we'll be able to pay any invoices that come across our desk. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I put my contact info down there at the bottom, and I will also be around at the end here for questions if you have any. That's it for me. Thanks, Brittany.
All right, thanks so much, Brad, for talking about that information. I think it's very useful for people who are interested in getting involved with state contracting, so thank you. So next up, we have Julian Pellegrini from Nevada Division of Forestry. Julian, if you'd like to start sharing your slides and getting ready to present while I introduce you, would be great. So Julian is the Nevada Division of Forestry Coordinator for the Biomass Utilization and Seed Bank programs out of the Regional State Office in Carson City. Much of his work entails a focus on providing native plant seed mixes to state agencies and landowners for the purpose of wildland restoration and habitat improvement. His past work has focused on natural resource management, education, and research in cultural Great Basin Native American uses of flora through the Nevada State Museum in Carson City. All right, Julian, go ahead.
Hey, Julian, it looks like you maybe went back on mute. I saw you for a second. Not sure if we've lost you. You are on mute. Now we lost your video again. We had you for a second. You can't get through a good Zoom call without at least one technical difficulty. Julian, I want to make sure you are a co-host, so you should be able to unmute yourself. And I'm going to send you, Julian, in a private chat, my contact info, and maybe we can troubleshoot this over the phone.
Liz, will you do that? Brittany, I saw that there was another question that maybe you can answer while we're trying to get that up. Did you see that in the chat?
Yes, I saw a few of them. Which one were you talking about?
So go ahead.
So I saw one that asked if NDOW would be open to considering other ways of evaluating cost other than the price per pound, like including habitat value in the cost of native forbs. I can tell you that we do already do that in a way, but the realities of the funding available and the cost of native forbs just kind of forces us to purchase what we can at the time. For example, I mean, the cheapest globe mallow available is usually at least $60 per pound. Some of them are over $100 per pound. And that's just how we purchase seed. That's how we build our seed mixes, is based on pounds per acre, PLS pounds, all that kind of stuff. So we definitely do consider habitat value when we're making our seed mixes and try to design around that. Another question was, are rates of establishment factored into the cost of non-cultivar natives? Yes, but there really are not many non-cultivar natives available on a large enough scale for our projects. And if they are, we just don't really know about them yet. So that obviously does not include sagebrush or four-wing or anything that's hand collected and source ID'd. But yeah, if there were more non-cultivar natives available for us to purchase, we would, if they covered the scale that we needed to cover.
Let's give it a go. Julian, can you unmute? I can't hear you still. Darn it. So another thing that we can try, sorry folks, is actually when you go to the bottom of that up caret, you can switch to phone audio, and it's going to prompt you to call in. So you can call in, maybe using a speakerphone on your office phone, and that might have better audio. And while we do that, Brittany, if you want to take another question, we'll keep troubleshooting over here.
All right. So I guess first of all, if I did not answer the first couple questions as you wished, please let me know in the chat and I can expand more. There is a question from Steve. Have we analyzed Indow shrub seed buys for the same purpose or same period? And yes, we have. I have my spreadsheet open here. So shrubs, about 60% of the shrubs that we purchased were native and 30% were non-native, or 66, 33, however you want to say that. And with that, I believe for native shrubs, each year we spend about $350,000, which is pretty close to that native grass value that I mentioned before. And about About 62% of the total amount of money we spent on shrubs were towards native, and then the other corresponding 38% were non-native. And the shrubs that we use a lot are all the big sagebrush species. So that includes Wyoming, mountain, basin big sagebrush. We do buy antelope bitterbrush a lot, especially in areas that are important for mule deer winter range. And then also four-wing saltbush is another one. All right, Liz, how's it going over there?
We are still troubleshooting a little bit. So we can either try and swap presentations, or if people can hold on for maybe 2 more minutes, I think we're going to have it sorted out. Thanks all for your patience. We did a trial a week ago, but you never know. Everybody's computer settings change a little bit from a day-to-day basis, I feel like, especially in this virtual world that we're all living in. So let's unmute you here. Try again, Julian.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Gosh, I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm just glad we were able to figure it out.
So to begin with, my forte is in technology. My name is Julian Pellegrini. I'm with the Nevada Division of Forestry. I'm the seed bank and biomass coordinator. Just my presentation is really brief. It'll probably be about a quarter of the length of time it took me to get my audio to work. To give a really brief overview of what I do with my program is it's based on a couple of different factors. Ultimately, I collect native seed, my department collects native seed to facilitate native plant production in our nursery facilities, as well as on contract for providing seed increase lots to commercial growers. The COVID situation has put on the skids to the latter in the last year, though I have heard that the seed collection field season is going to be back online as per this summer and fall. We also order and use seed internally to restore and rehabilitate land annually when initiatives are funded. NDF has a contract through Granite Seed Company, which renews every 3 years. This contract ensures that NDF can purchase seed from 44 different species, which as seed prices fluctuate over time, this is a benefit to me and people who purchase seed from us. It allows us to stick with a set price. So this is a good incentive for agencies and landowners to purchase seed mixes through NDF. We also sell seed mixes to state agencies such as the Department of Wildlife, as well as private landowners, big and small. Our primary focus is on seed procurement and sales on wildland restoration projects, such as after wildland fire, as well as habitat improvement and restoration, and personal interest as well from the public, from people that want to grow native plants. The seed bank has a host of seeding machinery as well, like rangeland seed drills and broadcast seeders. We use this equipment internally to implement seeding projects, but we also rent some of that equipment to landowners to facilitate their seeding needs. The seed bank as well, we also have a storage facility in Washoe Valley and some limited cold storage availability at the Washoe Nursery. We also, and this has been very recently, but we're in the process of putting together a seed bank storage facility in Elko County as well. The seed bank and nursery also has seed cleaning and mixing machinery to assist in some of this. One of my goals moving forward in the future as well is to, in addition to collecting site-specific, genetically appropriate seed, is to also enlist some of the aid from landowners to grow native plants for seed collection in the future.
All right. Thank you, Julian.
You bet.
And again, I'm going to ask Liz just to post that PTAC slide here real quick, just so people have a chance to have that information again, because it is applicable to state contracting as well. So again, I've provided that link in the chat box for people to visit. And the contact for each individual PTAC office is listed there at the bottom, as well as the email address to get in contact with them. Great, thank you, Liz. And thank you, Julian and Brad, for the state presentations. So our final presenter today is here representing private industry. Brian, would you like to start sharing your screen and getting your presentation ready while I introduce you? Brian Taylor is the Mitigation Project Manager for Nevada Gold Mines. mainly working on sage grouse mitigation through the bank enabling agreement. He has worked as an estimator for a heavy excavation construction company, a range specialist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and an environmental engineer for Cortez Mines, where he focused on permitting, reclamation, and closure. All right, take it away, Brian.
Can you see it? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep, looks perfect, and I can hear you.
Okay. Thanks, Brittany, for that. And as Brittany said, I'm Brian Taylor, and I've worked for Barrick Nevada Gold Mines for almost 10 years. So today I'm going to go over one aspect of our sage grouse mitigation program, the reclamation requirements for one of our mines and the role native seed plays in both programs. Then I'll talk about the process of becoming a vendor for Nevada Gold Mines. But just keep in mind as I go through this that these are only 2 projects. Nevada Gold Mines has 10 underground mines and 12 open pit mines, plus multiple mitigation projects that are going on around the state. So the first project I'll talk about is the bank enabling agreement, which is one of Nevada Gold Mines' sage grouse mitigation programs. The majority of the restoration work in this project requires native seed to provide uplift to sage grouse habitat. There are 2 areas that we consistently run into issues, as has been discussed previously. One area is cost. Costs fluctuate quite frequently depending on the year and fire season, which also goes hand in hand with the availability of seed. We usually end up substituting at least one species in the mix every time we order seed, and it's usually a forb. So there are approximately 32,000 acres Nevada Gold Mines will be seeding by 2028 in the BEA. The majority of these acres will be annual grassland conversion. We try to drill seed unless the terrain isn't conducive, then we aerially seed the remaining acres. There's also around 10,000 acres of pinyon juniper removal that will need to be seeded, and possibly a few hundred acres of wet meadow areas that may or may not need to be seeded depending on the particular site. The BEA project plans define a desirable plant species as a species that are part of the native ecosystem or preferred by sage grouse and are able to establish under site soil conditions. With this project, we try to stick pretty close to the NRCS ecological site descriptions as far as species are concerned. In order to do this, we have seed tables in project plans, so we can pick species that have the best chance of establishing in that particular soil, elevation, climate. So there are three seed tables in the BEA project plans. There's the preferred tables, the pasture tables, and then the additional species tables that are used on a case-by-case basis. Typically, we get this seed delivered mixed already, and ready to be put in the ground. And I also wanted to show what species are that we are interested in throughout this presentation for growers or others who might be interested. I'm not going to save you the boredom that Brittany spared you, so bear with me as I'm going to go through all these species that are on these lists, starting with the BEA preferred grasses. So the preferred grasses for the BEA project are alkali sacaton, big blue stem, blue bunch wheatgrass, bottlebrush squirreltail, Guyetta grass, Great Basin wilderye, Idaho fescue, Indian rice grass, little blue stem, mountain brome grass, sandberg bluegrass, side oats grama, Snake River wheatgrass, and western wheatgrass. So these are the grasses that we choose from when we're seeding a lot of these upland areas. Even though the picture is of a wet meadow area, that's actually one of our conservation easements in the BEA. The preferred forbs are arrowleaf, balsam root, astragalus, bluebells, Canadian milkvetch, desert parsley, false dandelion, firecracker penstemon, hawksbeard, Lewis flax, Maximilian sunflower, Palmer penstemon, Rocky Mountain penstemon, scarlet globe mallow, sago lily, sulfur flower buckwheat, and sweet vetch. And this is a picture of one of the aerial seedings that we did with the helicopter over some of the pinyon juniper removal projects that we were doing. The preferred shrubs are antelope bitterbrush, basin big sagebrush, black sagebrush, bush ocean spray, common snowberry, desert gooseberry, Douglas rabbitbrush, alkali low sagebrush, fringe sagebrush, golden currant, little leaf horsebrush, low sagebrush, mountain big sagebrush, mountain snowberry, rubber rabbitbrush, Saskatoon serviceberry, snowbrush, ceanothus, spineless horsebrush, Utah serviceberry, wax currant, western snowberry, Wyoming big sagebrush, and yellow rabbitbrush. This is the picture on here is of one of the seedings, the seeding of that prior picture with the helicopter after we removed some of the pinyon juniper, showing that the sagebrush seeds actually grew that year. So then we have the pasture grass seeding mix. The grasses are Garrison foxtail, orchard grass, perennial rye, Russian wild rye, slender wheatgrass, smooth brome. And then the forbs are alfalfa, bird's foot trefoil, Sicer milkvetch, globe mallow, red clover, and western yarrow. And this is one of the pastures that we are doing some work on over on the JD Ranch. So then we have another table, which there are additional species depending on your objectives. They're considered for erosion control, annual grass infestation, and fuel breaks. So the grasses are crested wheatgrass, inland saltgrass, intermediate wheatgrass, and then shrubs, spud sagebrush, forage kochia, four-winged saltbush, Nevada Mormon tea, shad scale, spiny hop sage, and winterfat. The top picture there is of one of the project areas that's totally covered in cheatgrass, and there's knapweed and there's other stuff in there too. But that bottom left is where we sprayed and we went in and seeded that area. And then the right, the bottom right is that next year where all the bunch grasses were taken over. And so now I'm going to talk about some of the mine reclamation. So there are two ways we handle mine reclamation at Nevada Gold Mines. One of them is concurrent reclamation, and then the other is closure. So concurrent reclamation is when we reclaim areas where activities are complete. This usually entails purchasing seed for small areas. And I mean, just to throw a number on it, we might do less than 100 acres a year. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, especially if we're closing like a big waste rock dump or where we might, order more than that. But when we're doing concurrent reclamation, it can kind of be problematic because mines are constantly evolving with ore prices, new discoveries. And sometimes an area has been reclaimed, ends up being reopened to mining again. So then we have to go back and order seed again and do it all over again. And then closure, is usually when we're done mining, everything needs to be seeded. Closure usually involves large seed purchases, especially if concurrent reclamation hasn't been done. So every mine should have a reclamation permit or plan. And one of our reclamation permits, it talks about the reclaimed desired plant community. It states, the plant community for the reclaimed desired plant community, or RDPC, should be diverse and when appropriate for the site should include grasses, forbs, shrubs, and or trees. The RDPC shall be comprised of species native to the area or introduced species where the need is documented for inclusion to achieve the approved post-mining land use. The RDPC must meet the requirements of applicable state and federal seed, poisonous and noxious plants and introduced species laws or regulations. And all RDPCs must be approved by the agencies. Much like the BEA project plans, the reclamation permit has seed tables where you can pick a few of the species depending on soil type, location. This reclamation permit that I'm going to go over has 3 different seed mixes. It has an interim seed mix, a high elevation seed mix, and a low seed mix. The interim seed mix is more or less just for, erosion control, and it usually goes on berms or growth media stockpiles where we're stockpiling topsoil to reclaim some of the areas of the site. The seed mix is just alfalfa and crested wheat, and the application rate's 2 pounds per acre. So nothing really extravagant there. The low elevation seed mix grasses include crested wheatgrass, Indian white rice grass, basin wild rye, bottlebrush squirreltail, inland saltgrass, alkali sacaton, Russian wild rye, and intermediate wheatgrass. And here again, like I said, we can, I think this particular one, you can pick 4 species out of that. And then the low elevation seed mix for forbs is scarlet globe mallow, Palmer penstemon, Lewis flax, yellow sweet clover. And low elevation seed mix for shrubs is 4-wing saltbush, shadscale, winter fat, forage kochia, Nevada Mormon tea, spiny hopsage, and Douglas rabbit brush. The high elevation seed mix grasses are crested wheat, Indian rice grass, basin wild rye, bottlebrush squirreltail, intermediate wheatgrass. And the forbs are scarlet globe mallow, Palmer's penstemon, Lewis flax, sweet vetch, and yellow sweet clover. And the shrubs are Wyoming big sagebrush, 4-wing saltbush, spiny hopsage, forage kochia, Nevada Mormon tea, and Douglas rabbit brush. So those are the seed tables that we can pick for depending on where we're actually doing the project. And I thought also, mentioning it's not something that we're actually looking for, but Cortez operated a native seed farm for a time. And we ended up shutting it down in 2017, but it ran for about 10 years or so. And the species that we had out on that seed farm were milk vetch, basin wild rye, blue bunch wheatgrass, cryptantha, gray rabbit brush, ephedra, bud sagebrush, low sagebrush, shad scale, rayless daisy, bottlebrush squirreltail, Indian rice grass, basin big sagebrush, winter fat, green rabbit brush, and mountain mahogany. There were a few issues that we had with the seed farm. First was the location. It was out in the middle of nowhere. We did not have power out there, so everything had to be done by hand. All our seed sorting, collection, everything, cleaning. And so that was one issue. Another issue was it just was not big enough to meet the needs for the mines. And so it was costing us a lot of money to get very little seed out of it. And then the third one, and what put the nail in the coffin on it, was we had a Medusa head infestation throughout all that whole farm. And at that point, we did not want to risk collecting seed and then planting Medusa head somewhere else. So we decided to shut that down. So now that you've seen all the seed that we can potentially buy, you may be asking, well, how do I become a supplier? First, you need to notify the person in charge of the seeding project at NGM of your interest in becoming a supplier, just such as me, and once I know you're interested, I can then complete the supplier request information through our core, which is a program that we use. And all I need initially is your name, address, taxpayer ID, what you supply, and then I just put in there a justification on why I want you to become a supplier. After that's complete, vendor maintenance would then send the prospective supplier a questionnaire that contains information such as, what you're selling, what services can you provide. It also asks for like business license number, browse number, and then they state what the insurance requirements are for NGM, and that varies depending on how big your company is and how many employees you have and whatnot. Then depending on your questionnaire and how complete the information is, that kind of determines how long it takes to set you up. Also, your safety record is taken into account, and they may need to know like how many employees you have, your state insurance number, and all that needs to be complete prior to your setup in the system. And again, time of completion varies depending on the company. So after you're all set up in the system, as I said before, we typically have, and then you're awarded a contract. So a lot of Nevada Gold Mines, or not all of Nevada Gold Mines, the contracting process is competitive. So if you're selected to provide seed for us, we typically have the seed mix prior to delivery, and we usually have the seed delivered directly to the project site for our contractors to plant. We don't really have anywhere to store seed. Sometimes the mines will be able to store seed in their warehouses short term. Yeah, so once you're a vendor and you've supplied the seed to us, you're probably wondering, how do I get paid? And that is also a process. So NGM works through SAP and Ariba software, and some suppliers are already an Ariba vendor. However, if you're not, NGM can submit required documents for the payment process. The terms and conditions depend on what the supplier would be providing and would be addressed after the initial setup. And then the payment is provided through electronic deposits into the supplier's bank account. And with that, hopefully this was informative and kind of gave you an idea of the projects that NGM's working on and some of our native seed requirements and how to become a vendor if you're interested. And I will end it with that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you to all of our other presenters today for shedding some light on the market for selling native seed in Nevada. We will move into our panel discussion now, but first we have another poll question up for all of you to answer. This question will be up for about a minute, and after that, Dirk Netz with the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest will take over the panel discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dirk Netz. As Brittany mentioned, I work for the U.S. Forest Service here in the state of Nevada. We'll be moving on to our panel discussion now. And as a reminder, we have Michael Taylor from UNR. I believe Corrine is no longer with us, but Tricia Roller, Brittany Trimble, Brad Tate, Julian Pellegrini from NDF, and of course, Brian Taylor from Nevada Gold Mines. So
we're still running the poll for just another minute, Dirk. So just hold on and we'll
we can do that.
A couple more folks respond.
Sure. So while we're waiting for that, I have to give my thanks to Brittany Trimble for her fantastic performance today. She's addressed most of the questions that our audience has put in the chat as we've moved along, and there's only a couple of them that I may go back to and double check to make sure everybody's had their questions answered. And then we'll proceed from there.
Yeah, folks should be seeing the results of the poll. And I just want to add for folks to know, people do have the ability to turn their video on, and we're going to enable people to unmute themselves as well. So as we get into this question and answer, you will be able to, you're welcome to turn your video on so that we can have a nice rigorous discussion. We invite as many people as would like to turn their videos on, and then we'll be able to, you can ask your question live if you'd like. All right, it's up to you. It's all you, Dirk.
Very much. As Liz just mentioned, I mean, you should have the ability to unmute yourself. So I also believe that you have the ability to raise your hand. For those who do not or have not put a question in the chat and would like to ask your question live, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. Then we have a series of chat questions that we could probably also go back to, and more of them coming in. And then we also have the ability to take questions from the phone. So our first question, and I don't see any hands raised right now, but we do have some questions that are left over from the chat that I would like to make sure that we have addressed. Question from Beth Ledger. I'm not entirely sure if we answered this, but would NDOW be open to considering other ways of evaluating cost other than price per pound, like including habitat value and the cost of native forests?
Yes, I did touch on this question a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, we do definitely consider habitat value when we're making our seed mixes and deciding what forbs have the highest habitat value, how much they cost, and how far they might stretch across our project site.
Okay, the next question was actually from Megan Brown. I don't know if we touched on this, but she asks Julian, can you give us any more detail regarding the seed warehouse in Elko?
Yeah, and as I pointed out, I don't know if you can't or can see it. The bottom line is I don't really know a whole lot about it. I do know, though, that in October 2020, mid-month when I came into this position, there was an order on my desk to make a purchase for a medium to small size storage facility for Elko, and it was for the housing of seed and some small equipment, 4-wheelers, you know, like seed distribution boxes, that sort of thing. So we made the purchase, and I'm not sure at this point if they're online with it, if it's in operation, but we did make the purchase.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Question from Steve for Brian. Is Nevada Gold Mines Bank Enabling Agreement the same as or a part of the Nevada Conservation Credit System for sagegrass?
No, they're two different. I should have Liz talk about this. They're two different systems. The bank enabling agreement was signed separate from the conservation credit system, and to my knowledge, it was actually signed before the conservation credit system was put into place. So they're two different systems. The bank enabling agreement uses TNC's model to determine debits and credits that we can get for doing that sage grouse mitigation.
Liz, would you like to elucidate on that?
Sure. I mean, I think maybe an important point is that they're both really important for sage grouse, and the state system, which is more sort of broadly used, you know, hopefully will allow for folks, or certainly on private land, allows for folks to get credit for good habitat on private lands, and so, you know, using native seeds and doing restoration efforts on those private lands can be really valuable in that system, you know, to date, and then the bank enabling agreement has sort of similar things going on. So they're all kind of aiming at the same goal of creating good habitat for greater sage grouse.
Excellent. So for our next question, Steve asks another question of Brian, and I'd like to invite Steve to, if you can, take yourself off mute and ask this question, because I'm not sure I can get to the core of what you're asking. And it's presumably about the seed beds. Are you available? Okay, I'll go ahead and give it a stab then. This is for Brian. Presumably, a seed vendor would work entirely off mine site. Couldn't the high levels of required insurance be waived? Usually about 250,000 range. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the mines, if you're working on the mine site, they usually require a really high amount of insurance. Upwards of $1 million. But typically, if you're not working on site, then that insurance rate drops significantly. So yes, the required insurance, I'm not sure if it can totally be waived, but it won't be near what folks that actually come out to the mine site have to have.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. We have another question from Louis Lindy. If you're available, I would also like to invite you to ask a question.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Can indeed.
Okay, so my question was for a rancher who would be interested in growing seed. The biggest challenge is harvesting, cleaning, and bagging. If somebody's willing to just try a small test plot, let's say like 5 to 10 acres or even smaller than that, is there any resources where they could get their seed cleaned and bagged at already established facilities. And also, most folks don't have access to a combine. So that would be another hitch point. I was just wondering if there's been any efforts to kind of open up those opportunities for people who just want to dip their toes in the water without tearing out their established hay fields.
That's a great question, sir. I would open that up to the panel. Is there anyone that would like to take a first step?
It looks like Shannon and Ed had some comments in the chat box. Do Shannon and Ed want to unmute themselves and discuss?
I'd probably defer to Ed first because he is the master of seed cleaning and native species. Ed, you want to talk first?
Folks, can you hear me? Yeah, well, we do occasionally clean small amounts of seed for other people. State Parks has called us recently to supply small amounts for their nursery, which are going to grow out, I suspect, in supercells for transplants. But at the same time, we have lots of agency folks and some private sector folks asking if we can clean small amounts for them, and we're happy to accommodate that. Usually they are quite surprised at how little it costs to clean small amounts of seed. Our machines do it relatively quick. We also have in-stock seed to offer to folks that don't want to even supply us with their own seed, that we can verify the local sources there where we got them, whether they're SI'd or not. So the options are pretty flexible, and we've done all sorts of arrangements like that.
So the UNR seed bank is similar with Comstock in that we can process small amounts of seed. And we've done this for local nonprofits as well as private industry who have nowhere else to send the seed. And I will provide a link to our Google form in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Hey, one last comment there. We've also, like a year ago, we had a contract with the Southern Nevada Water Authority to go to their site, pick seed on their property, bring it back and clean it, and then send it back to their nursery for grow out. That was to get them the ultimately local source to seed that they wish to use for their projects. And it was a rather fun project, but a little expensive for them. There's a mobility overhead there that sends us down the highway. So, it's a tough call.
Gotcha, thank you.
So if there's no other input from our panel, I would like, before we let Ed go, we did promise that we would come back and possibly have you discuss a little bit more about subsidizing your own research and development as a grower.
Is this a question to me?
Yeah, well, you put it in the chat box for us. It started off the conversation with yesterday. It looked evident that Hedgerow and BFI used their own workhorse species to subsidize high-risk species, thus subsidizing their own research and development.
Several years ago, we had great assistance from the ARS to supply us with supercells of small plants for production. And we had a crash in the field related to the unknown impacts of pre-emergent herbicides. And that was a federal subsidy to our farm to help us get going on a project. But we just didn't know. We didn't have the knowledge to know that what we were doing was devastating. I'm not a big grower, so I defer to the speakers yesterday for their prowess on the side, but I've visited and witnessed many farms that have quite the diversity of species in production. And I'm sure that each year there are the highs and lows of each species, whether it be the environmental impacts or the market volatility. But somewhere in there's a happy medium where some species are already on high. We've tried to have an arrangement years ago with a rancher because he had a lot of Indian rice grass on the edges of his pivots. And but the year we discussed it with him, the dollar value was quite high. A few years later, when he produced us some tote bags of Indian rice grass to be cleaned for the market, the price had bottomed out. So that he didn't get much out of that. I gave him the option of selling short to us then or holding on to it down the road until the market was lean again. And he didn't want to inventory his own materials. And we didn't need to sit on it that long ourselves. I don't know if you noticed the comment from Matthew or if he's even online today, but he had a comment about the instability created by the encouragement of the public agencies to get growers going. And the classic story was with a immigrant forage kochia years ago in Nevada. A whole bunch of folks started growing it highly successfully. And then it also became available for commercial contracting with the BLM in north central Nevada, where you could go out and sweep the stuff. And so who's going to be winning that contract? The grower with the overhead or the guy with the sweeping machine on a federal contract? But put those two together and the market was glutted. A success story, but for a farmer, a failure. Matthew sort of hinted at that on the chat session earlier today.
Thanks, sir.
Yep.
Also have a list of questions that the group would like to ask, and I'll put this before the panel. From a contractor's perspective, are there any barriers that make selling seed difficult or anything that might make contracting with agencies easier?
I might jump in here, Dirk, for just a second. And I think maybe Trish or Brittany, these might be good questions, or Brittany, I can't remember who, if it was Bradley that presented with you, maybe from the agency's perspective of contracting, do you see barriers for entry instead of, I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about today was perceived from the grower side. And I think it might be helpful to know if there's anything from your perspective. And I don't know if Trish is still on or not, but.
Brad would be more suited to answer this question from Endow's perspective.
I'm still on. Trisha is still on.
Go ahead, Patricia.
That's an interesting and timely question. From my personal experience, I think like the BLM needs to reach out more to help vendors understand the process. I'm really, really glad that we're having this forum today. I think this kind of communication is important. And then providing that Nevada TPEC TPAC information to the whole group is important. And I just think that it is important that we share not only just within Nevada, but we share nationally how vendors can be a part of the solution.
May I comment again in there?
Yeah.
Last year, a pretty organized effort was made by a group of farmers up in Burns, Oregon. They formed a partnership, High Desert Partnership, and contracted us to collect blue bunch wheatgrass within a 50-mile radius of all of their farms. And we pulled in 1,200 pounds of material and cleaned out several hundred clean pounds of local source blue bunch. They're working outside of the realm of, I think, the federal agencies at that point, and just put themselves together as a group and got us involved, and we shipped up that and small amounts of several other native grasses, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of that. When you get 8 or 9 farmers together and all the prowess and infrastructure that they have under their belts and go out to grow a grass in this case, which is what they're probably doing more than anything else. Pivot irrigation, everything going on, weed control, chemical and technology. And who knows, maybe we got to be part of stimulating a regional market supply of a species on a local source genetic basis. I was thrilled with that project. All power to them up there.
Thank you, Ed.
Sure.
We have another question from our list that may be maybe most of our consumers, our land management partners, would be interested in answering. Are there specific native species that you are more that you use more than others, or species that you would like to have more available?
So I included a couple slides in my presentation with the species that we use most often and would like to see produced more. I can share my screen and show those again if that would be useful.
Can you lean in again when you describe your slides?
Yes. Sorry, technical issues here.
And as a follow-up, I'd be interested, well, when Brittany brings them up, if we have any growers on the call, you know, to have some kind of conversation about, of the species that you guys would really like to have, which one of them seem like they're the easiest to produce, you know, agronomically. I think that would be a really interesting conversation, especially if you see gaps there, you know, species that NDOW is really interested in and that folks think are going to be particularly difficult to grow, or the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good information to know. And just a disclaimer, by no means is this an exhaustive list of native grasses and forbs in the Great Basin. I included the ones that are more suited to lower precip zones that we might be able to use on a larger scale across the state for different projects. And again, the green underlined species here are the ones that we currently have included in some of our standardized mixes. These are definitely the species that we purchase and use most often. And those are bottlebrush squirreltail, Indian ricegrass, blue bunch wheatgrass, Great Basin wild rye, sandbergs, Snake River, thick spike, and western wheatgrasses. And then these species underlined in yellow are the ones that we probably use the most often that are not as available as other species. So we would like to see them be more available, especially locally adapted lines of them. And then for forbs, again, not an exhaustive list by any means. There are way more wildflowers in the Great Basin than these, but these species underlined in green are the ones that we have the most access to right now and the ones that we probably purchase the most often. But the ones in yellow are the ones that have really high wildlife value and would be usable in different areas of the state, and we would purchase a lot more often if they were more available and economical. Anyone have any comments or questions? And I can provide this list to Russ after the forum so he can share it with the other outreach information afterwards, if that would be helpful.
I have one point, if I can jump in real quick too. Brittany, is that I think that the most common plant seed that I sell, in fact, I don't think I've had an order yet without it, is blue bunch wheatgrass. In fact, we even exceeded our contract amount through Granite Seed Company.
Yeah, we use that one a lot. It fits in a lot of different habitat types across the state, so it's a good one.
So here's a follow-up question to that. Why do you think that that particular species is so popular?
I think just its suitability to the lower precipitation zone and its ability to grow with multiple other species that are endemic to the state or native to the state. So I see it a lot, that's for sure.
Thank you, Brittany. I want to make sure that we get back to a question that I may have overlooked. And it was from Beth Ledger to Brian. Do you have a monitoring component to your restoration? Are you using interested species of shrubs? I'd love to know if establishment data is available.
Yeah, there is definitely a monitoring component to what we're doing. We have established monitoring points throughout the project for the BEA. So we hire a third-party firm to come out and do that monitoring for us and kind of put together a report. And we actually submit that report to the agencies as part of our annual report for the whole project. So yes, there is a monitoring component. At the mine site, there's usually not as detailed monitoring going on over there. Usually it's, is it bare or does it have plants on it? So, but as far as the BA concerned, yes, there's definitely a monitoring component to it. And yeah, the shrub success on that one project was pretty awesome. So.
But just to clarify, Brian, sorry, I keep jumping in here. You're not necessarily tracking the establishment of specific species, you know, the way that maybe, you know, UNR researcher might be interested, right? You're more interested in whether or not you're achieving sort of overall habitat objectives, not the actual establishment data.
Right. Yeah. If there's any establishment data, it's just what we have observed over time. So thanks, Liz.
That's fantastic. I want to thank the audience for all of their questions. They seem to come in at a
Oh no, did we lose Dirk?
I think we lost Dirk.
Yeah. Oh.
I'd love handbooks.
Dirk, we lost you. Brittany, I think you should just go ahead and take the reins here for the last couple questions.
Okay, let me make sure I'm in the same spot as Dirk left off. So from James Gatsky, for all presenters, how much lead time do you have on restoration projects? For example, how much time is available to collect and or grow certain species or ecotypes? I can start off with that one. This is something we're currently trying to work out the kinks on from the state side. A lot of our funding is year by year, but we are working very closely with our fiscal department to figure out how we can change that and make these multiple year projects more doable. Just using the information from the standardized species list that I provided, the species we use most often, those would kind of be safe bets that for species that NDOW would purchase. We do work with the BLM on most of our restoration projects, especially for pinyon juniper removal. So just being aware of those projects through NEPA documents and stuff, knowing that we might eventually purchase seed for them. And you can always reach out to myself or anyone else at NDOW, and they'll direct you to the correct person to answer your questions about potential seed needs and upcoming projects and stuff like that.
Typically for us, we also, we've been working on a year-to-year basis, just depending on budgets and whatnot. But we are working on a budget right now to hopefully procure money out to like 2029. So, and if that goes through, in that case, we'll have a much longer lead time for some of these projects that we're doing. And then usually the mine site, they're on a year-to-year, just depending on what the mine engineers, decide is worth going after or not. So.
So this is Patricia Roller from the BLM perspective. The purpose of increasing storage capacity up to 2.6 million pounds is to basically minimize the need for a quick turnaround. That may halfway answer your question, but that's why we have a spring buy to stock those warehouses, and then continue to do the fall buying 3 times a year in the fall and winter in order to have that seed available for especially those wildfire emergency stabilization and rehabilitation projects that need seed quickly. So our goal is to have that seed up front and readily available to minimize that quick turnaround.
All right, thank you, Brian and Tricia, for adding to that. I've been made aware that there was some information about seed cleaning that we should mention above. So Shannon and Ed both talked about seed cleaning from their side. Julian in the chat mentioned that NDF might be capable of some seed cleaning that he's going to look into. And then also Jennifer Tainton from, I guess I don't know where she's from. She posted a link, the ecosourcenativeseeds.com, in the chat for more information on their seed cleaning facility in Burns, Oregon.
Brittany, that's the HDAP group that I just mentioned. That's Jennifer and Roger Shelley.
Perfect. Thank you. Dirk, are you back? You want to take back over? Or do you want me to keep going? Okay.
That's fine. I think the proximity of the Stead Airport really messes with things for me. So I do apologize if you guys are hearing like air traffic background noise. So I have to turn my mute off or my microphone off.
No problem. Shannon, she kind of called out Charlie Duncan to chime in. Charlie, you have experience growing lots of native forbs. Do you have any specific species that you would suggest to grow? Is Charlie still with us? Maybe not. All right, moving on. Unless Shannon, you have anything to add. Okay. Let's see.
I'd sure like to see more annual herbs. Annuals grow fairly easy if you have clean soil. Broadleaf weed issues are quick, but geez, to have more nurse crops for colonizers and for grouse habitat would be awesome.
It looks like Steve posted something. That's pretty long. Steve, are you available to turn your mic on and ask the question yourself? I'm not seeing him, so I'll just read it. To help, oh, his mic isn't working. That's all right. To help reduce apparent native plant material shortages, very small scale landowners, less than 5 acres, could be encouraged to participate in grassroots native plant material initiatives if marketing opportunities existed for them. Personally, I'm growing large seeded indeterminate perennial species, but in small quantities. Marketing opportunities seem very limited, so I have not expanded. Could initiatives like the pollinator plant movement and edible landscaping movement serve as models for native plant materials? Would anyone like to tackle that one?
Hey, give me a call, Steve. What more can I say? Yeah.
I might just jump in right before you do a closing, Brittany. I think it's an awesome idea. And I also think in hopes of talking, having Nevada Gold Mines and some other opportunities, I think some of those barriers are a little different for volume and consistency versus more standardized. And so I think it's noted, and I think something maybe for the NNSP to talk about on how we can bring some of these types of maybe smaller, less consistent markets to the forefront for some of you growers that can have some more resources. So I think that's noted and appreciated, and hopefully we can move forward with some more information in the future. So thank you.
So Jess, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask your question before we close it down here?
So I just had something to follow up with what Steve suggested. I've actually had this conversation with a bunch of people. I'm in the Reno area, and often they ask me, like, why isn't there any kind of native plant garden certification for small, so it's like very small growers, like people who are private landowners around the area. And folks that I've thought of that could fill that role would be things like the Nevada Native Plant Society. But yeah, I have heard that as well, Steve, and I think that's a great idea. This kind of modeling after what like pollinator gardens and edible landscape gardens and things like that.
All right, I think that's a good point, Jess. Thank you. So with that, I think I'm gonna close it up for the day. Thank you everyone so much for participating in our 2-day virtual forum. It's been awesome seeing how many people are interested in native seed production in Nevada. I want to thank all of our presenters and also Liz Munn, big time, for helping us on the technical side for Zoom and being our tech guru for the whole forum. Just a reminder that both days of the forum were recorded and will be available on the Nevada Department of Agriculture YouTube page, and I believe a link on the NDA website as well. We will be following up with everyone who's registered with a feedback survey, if you wouldn't mind filling that out for us to help us improve for next year and knowing other topics that you might be interested in. And we will also be sending out resources presented both yesterday and today that might be helpful to you in the future. Also, we would like to share the attendee list with everyone after the meeting. If you don't want your contact information shared, please email Russell Wilhelm, who you emailed to get registered with the forum, so he will know not to share your information. So with that, unless anyone has anything else to add, thanks again, and we'll see you next year.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
See you guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks. See ya.